que no se siente de verdad, verdad, no se piensa de verdad, verdad. Tenemos que sentir el socialismo como cruje debajo de nuestros propios pies, como un temblor, como un fuego.
In 1849, writing about the French Revolution, Marx said, quote, "The revolution made progress, forged ahead, not by its immediate tragicomic achievements, but on the contrary, by the creation of a powerful, united counter-revolution, by the creation of an opponent in combat with whom the party of overthrow ripened into a really revolutionary party." End quote. Key moments in the history of the Bolivarian process in Venezuela have confirmed this thesis. Where would the revolution be today had the April 2002 coup not radicalized Chávez and the Venezuelan population more broadly? Likewise, the brutal US-led sanctions campaign has ultimately led grassroots socialist organizations to reinvent themselves and come together to survive the conditions created by the economic blockade. This concept, sometimes called the whip of counter-revolution, serves to illustrate the dialectic of revolution. In countries on the periphery, like Venezuela, our class enemies find strength through their alliance with imperialism. But we would be committing a grave mistake if we retreated in the face of their attacks. Indeed, it is in the struggle against the powerful, united counter-revolution that we open up the possibility for revolutionary change. This is the story of the struggle of the Venezuelan communards, who in the face of crisis, opted to double down on the need to organize the working class, and may ultimately light the path that brings us closer to the socialist horizon. Welcome to the Venezuelanalysis podcast. I'm your host, José Luis Granados Ceja. The Venezuelanalysis podcast brings you independent, on-the-ground, English-language coverage of Venezuela and the Bolivarian process. You'll hear news and in-depth analysis about the country, as well as coverage of leftist and grassroots forces. On today's episode, we're looking at the organizing efforts of the Communard Union and the advancements in building the communal economy. The Communard Union is a grassroots organization that has set communal society as its strategic horizon, working to reactivate Venezuelan communes, building dual power, and putting social ownership of the means of production on the agenda. To discuss the genesis of the Communard Union and its role in defending socialism as the strategic horizon of the Bolivarian Revolution, we will speak with Juancho Lenzo. He is a co-founder of Tatuy Television, a media project that is committed to the Chavista popular movement, and the Communard Union's communications coordinator. But first, we'll speak with Venezuelanalysis Cira Pascual Marquina, who shares with us the ABCs of the Venezuelan communal economy, her experiences documenting the efforts of communards to build a productive capacity and end their isolation.
Hello, Cira. It's good to have you here on the program. I always feel like it's such a privilege to be able to talk to you about issues around the communal process in Venezuela because you have such a wealth of experience seeing things firsthand. And on this episode, we're talking about communal production, communal economy, kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of what it means to build a socialist economy, or at least something that is approaching a socialist economy. So to begin, I thought I would ask, can you talk to us about the basics of the communal economy and what is its connection to this concept that is so celebrated and defended in Venezuela of a participatory and protagonist democracy? What's the link between that political question and the economic question when we're talking about communes in Venezuela today?
Thank you, José Luis. It's great to be here. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that actually the commune for us is not only the process to reach socialism, but it is also the end goal. Sometimes people interpret the commune as a mechanism to reach socialism, but I would say it's both the process and the end goal in the Bolivarian Revolution. And I would I do have the hypothesis that this goes beyond the Bolivarian Revolution, call it however you want to, but communalization of life is in the epicenter of what we consider to be the strategic project when we are talking about socialism. So that's kind of like a preamble. But when we talk about the communal economy, I think it's very important to kind of like take or go over some of our basic concepts from the left, right? So in a capitalist market, exchange, basically the exchange between producers and consumers. Producers being generally, of course, the side of production being the working class, and the consumers also being the working class. All this is mediated by the market, by the bourgeoisie. So when we talk about, in terms of value, when we talk about the organization of the economy, we are talking about exchanges in terms of exchange uses in the capitalist market. Now, this means, of course, that when you organize the economy, or when you look at how the capitalist economy is organized, the most important thing that we have to understand is that the production has one simple goal: the accumulation of wealth, and not the satisfaction of people's needs. Now, when you look at a socialist economy, the exchange would happen between use values. The use value is at the center. So it's not about private accumulation, concentration of capital and private accumulation, but it is actually about production in terms of satisfying society's needs. Now, when in our society, when we come to the commune, how does this express itself? That's the big question. How does a communal economy actually express itself? Well, I would say that the first thing about a communal economy is precisely linked to what you were saying in the question, or your reflection about participative and protagonic democracy. When we talk about reorganizing society in a profoundly democratic way, we are talking about reorganizing society not only in political terms, but also in economic terms. But how do you actually reorganize the society in economic terms? Well, the first thing is that, again, going back to capitalism, the means of production, capital is in the hands of a few, who we call the bourgeoisie or capitalists, and the majority of society has to work to live and has no means of production, is dispossessed of means of production. So that is obviously profoundly undemocratic. Like capitalism is a profoundly undemocratic system, despotic and undemocratic. So when you think about how to build another society, obviously you have to revert this. So who has the means of production in a socialist society? The people who produce the goods, the people who produce the wealth, the people as a whole, like the working class. So the society takes the control of the means of production. However, of course, that's kind of like very broad. So how in every context, in every attempt to build a socialist democracy, there have been different exercises or different paths taken. So in the East Bloc, the state was the owner of the means of production. It wasn't direct property of the means of production by the people, but it was mediated by the state. If we come to our proposal, to Chávez's proposal in terms of the commune, I think the main thing here would be to highlight that in our context, the property is communal and social. So if you go to a commune in Venezuela, the communes that have means of production, and I should say here that while Chávez said that the commune is kind of like the fundamental space from which to build socialism, I should also highlight, and he also said that social property of the means of production was fundamental. Not all communes at all have social means of production. That is the goal. But it is a big pen and test for many communes that do not have collective means of production or social means of production. In any case, in principle, the way the proposal works is that a commune, that can be, there's of course rural communes, urban communes. A commune can have between, 5,000 to 20,000 people living in it. A commune will have a means of production, and collectively and democratically, it will be decided what you're going to produce, how you're going to produce, and very important, what you are going to do with the surplus. So the people decide all these elements about the production. And this is profoundly democratic. So going back to Chávez's idea of participative and protagonic democracy, we are talking not only about taking decisions about, until what time you can have loud music at home, which are things that actually get decided in assemblies, because they are important things to decide collectively, how you are going to live with your neighbors. But you also decide these kinds of things, like the nitty-gritty of the production, which is the nitty-gritty, but that's super, super important, that basically defines the form in which the society structures itself and its economy. So social property is in the epicenter, and democratic participation in the decision-making by the people who directly work in the means of production, but in general by all the people, whole community that is collectively, that are collectively the owners of the means of production. So basically, we are reverting the metabolism of capital with the commune. The metabolism of capital is authoritarian, is anti-democratic, and the communal metabolism would be democratic, and it will have in its epicenter the life of the people and not the accumulation of wealth.
One of the things I've always found so extraordinary about the limitations of the discourse around bourgeois democracy and its proponents is precisely that, how they're willing to predicate, to defend this concept of democracy. Meanwhile, they also ask at the same time to accept this authoritarian mode in your place of work and actually the ownership of the means of production. Well, in your last answer here, you gave us kind of a general perspective. I'm hoping we can go from the general to the particular. And I mentioned at the beginning, you have extraordinary firsthand experiences witnessing. I always want to remind our listeners that they should check out the Communal Resistance series, which is interviews with people on the ground doing this work. But maybe you could share with us briefly a little bit of some of the concrete experiences of communal production that you've been able to witness, maybe things that stand out to you as really exemplary cases of this kind of democratic organizing of the workplace and the means of production.
Sure. That sounds good. It's actually really wonderful. And it is a privilege to be able to get to know how communes organize. The communes are distributed throughout the country. And indeed, in this series, we are going to different communes to cover their organizational processes and also how they are impacted by the US blockade. But when we talk about, let's take two examples. The first example I would like to take is Cinco Fortalezas, which is a commune, commune led by women in Sucre, in the east of the country, in Sucre state. And in this commune is a cane-producing commune, sugarcane producing commune, and they also have a small trapiche, or kind of like machinery, a small plant to produce sugar bricks, which is kind of like a pre-processed sugar way of presenting sugar. So this commune is really, really wonderful. The women who are there, they had to take themselves a long struggle to take over the land. They do have, this is a commune with collective means of production, with social means of production. So in this commune, basically, as many communes, this commune comes out of a struggle. There was a struggle with the local large plant for sugar production. We are talking about an area in Sucre state where there's a lot of sugarcane production. So kind of like the commune grew around the situation of contradictions, of pretty profound contradictions. First, for the women, they wanted to have the land. The owner had left the country and the land was vacant. So these women who actually had been grown in the sugar plant, basically, they were the ones who organized to take over the land. Really wonderful experience. And this is in the first moment. And in the second moment, they had to organize because the local sugar plant, about 4 or 5 years ago, so this is a commune that has grown very quickly in very recent years, but 4 or 5 years ago, did not pay them, this commune or any of the local producers, for their crop, for the crop that had been delivered to the plant. So in the context of this struggle, which is actually still an ongoing struggle because these women have not been paid, for the crop that they delivered to the plant. But in this context, these compañeras began to really organize so that they wouldn't only have control of the land, but they also organized to reactivate some old machinery to be able to produce these kind of like semi-processed bricks of sugar. So the process has been, in terms of actually activating the economy, the communal economy, their process has been profoundly democratic, participative, but also part of a long-standing struggle. This is, on the one hand, interesting. It should be said, however, that, of course, these women had historically been sugarcane collectors. I mean, they were workers in the sugar plant, and it's actually not easy. Of course, the production of the sugar they could do perfectly well, but actually activating the means of production to make these bricks of pre-processed sugar has been difficult. Has been difficult for two reasons. One is the know-how. Lenin even talks about the know-how, no? How important it was in the after the Soviet Revolution to have people who knew how to do certain things in a rather complex system that is post-capitalist, but that it is industrialized, right? So there's the know-how. Communes, from my perspective, need to have support from institutions that have the knowledge, that have specifically the knowledge on how to produce certain things. And then, of course, communes need economic support. I mean, capital always gets economic support from the state wherever you are, including in Venezuela. Be by whatever mechanism you want to. Sometimes they are direct subsidies, which is generally the case, as most people know. In the United States, agriculture has big subsidies in the United States. And then other forms of indirect support from the state. So communes, to be able to really promote their communal economy, need more support. And that's the case with these compañeras. They have advanced a lot. They are producing the sugar cane, but their sugar brick making plant is kind of like going slowly. And there's another bigger, larger reason for this, is that, and this is something that Chávez talked about, is that a commune is a socialist island is a commune. A socialist island is not going to survive. You know, you need a socialist country. You know, like a commune that is isolated. It's not going to be able to flourish economically. Maybe it will flourish in many other ways, but it will not be flourished because we live in a capitalist society in Venezuela. So it's important to say that when we talk about this specific situation. Then I will talk about El Panal Commune here in Caracas. El Panal Commune, because it's actually the first commune that declared itself commune. Actually, even before Chávez talked about communes in 2006, El Panal called itself or identified itself as a commune. But of course, it wasn't until Chávez promotes the idea of the commune that it becomes a fully rounded project, no? But with El Panal Commune does have an advantage, that advantage is that it's been added for a long time. Its first means of production was a bakery, but it also has a textile factory. Well, it's for making clothes. It's not a textile factory. It also has a pig farm, a fish farm, a place where a little factory where they make soaps, etc., etc. All these are means of production that are collectively owned in the commune. In this commune, because there's this long trajectory, there's actually less dependency from the state. I'm saying a commune like the Cinco Fortalezas is dependent from the state because it is in a capitalist society. This other commune has been able to develop more autonomy, but that doesn't mean in any case that El Panal Commune or any commune that has been able to be added for a longer time, so its means of productions are more robust. They all should get support from the state, of course. But this commune has more autonomy, is less dependent on funding, because it's actually able to finance new initiatives, new productive initiatives, and of course political initiatives with the surplus of its production. So again, we are going back to the surplus. What happens with the surplus? In this commune, the surplus goes back to the community in two main different ways. One, social issues, addressing social issues. You know, we live in a country under a brutal blockade. There's people who need medicines. There's people who I don't know, there's people who have different needs, and the commune is able to address them at this, not at a huge level, but at a small level, the commune is able to address this. Or there's a communal canteen for people who don't have food, and there's support to the local schools, and so on and so forth. So I think that it's important to understand that communes are in different moments in their development, and that they need support, but that the most important thing is that they ultimately be autonomous and be the epicenter of the new economy that will emerge, that will not be the despotic, that will be democratic.
Now, you mentioned there a little bit about Chavez's emphasis on the need to keep it from being simply an island of socialism surrounded by capitalist relations. And I remember that distinctly in his most famous speech, his testament. He actually drew on a board a web of the way that should be interconnected, right? But we've seen, unfortunately, that we haven't been able to witness in Venezuela a breaking away from that isolation. It continues to be one of the major challenges in the whole process of organizing the communes. So I was hoping you could talk about the importance of this productive chain, why Chavez emphasized it so much, and also this concept of these exclusive zones of communal production.
I think when we talk about the productive linking, I think it's very simple. Obviously, we were talking about El Panal commune, there's this textile factory. Obviously, if you have to go to the market to get the fabric or the machinery, the capitalist market, to get the fabric or the machinery or what have you, you're really not breaking with the logic of capital. Even if you're producing even if the surplus is going to go back to the community, even if there's no exploitation on the side of production, still, basically, these means of production that are in the hands of the communes are relatively small, so it doesn't even make a dent in the logic of the capitalist market. And from there on, you can go to any means of production that you can imagine that communes have. Like an agrarian commune, it also needs the inputs. The inputs oftentimes come from big corporations, imported, not even produced in Venezuela, but coming from abroad. So all these things mean that there is not really, that we haven't been able to build a truly interlinked system. But there are some examples, I will talk about them, that are beginning to emerge. Still small, but important nonetheless. But so when we think about the productive linking, or specifically about the exclusive communal economic zones, the idea of the exclusive communal economic zones comes actually from the communes. Chavez talked about the interlinking, but communes are talking about these specific zones, specifically coming out of a proposal from El Panal, but many other communes are talking about it. And the idea is that there should be areas, little by little, there should be channels or areas that are defined as exclusively communal. It's not going to happen. The country is not going to become communal overnight, all of it. But as communes grow, like there's an aggregation of communes, and these aggregations of communes should be declared, but also should be legally recognized. But more importantly, they should actually exist as a spaces where the community economy is central. Like where it's favored, where it's truly favored through different mechanisms, both legal, economic, etc., etc. That is a proposal that's kind of like on the table, and it's part of our, like the stuff that communards that we struggle for, right? Not everybody in Venezuela is committed. Not even everybody within Chavismo at all is committed to the communal project. Nobody's going to say, "Oh, I am against it." But there's people who think that the communal project is something small and pretty, and it's an exercise that should be maintained, but it's not. They don't see it as the strategic objective. So there's all these elements that one has to consider, and there has to be kind of like a thinking about how to transition towards forms that are actually more beneficial to communes, that favor communes, and these are the formulas that we have been thinking about. And I think. I could give you like some examples, specifically some examples of initiatives that are kind of like pointing in this direction, although they are not fully developed. The first one is the communal economic zones. which is an initiative that's been promoted by the Ministry of Communes, a very good initiative promoted by the Ministry of Communes, but it doesn't come from below, so it comes from the ministry, but nonetheless, it's a very good initiative where the communes that produce, that have production, they exchange among each other. And you could say, well, why do you need the ministry? Well, you need the ministry because you need trucks, because you need infrastructure, because and communes are relatively, like oftentimes in a precarious economic situation. So that's why the ministry has to enter and also coordinate among the different communes. So that if one commune produces flour and the other commune produces meat, basically there's a space of circulation amongst the communes, and that's very interesting, very important, still emerging. Organizations like the Communard Union, and I think you're going to be talking to Juancho soon in the next segment. Organizations like the Communard Union have tried to have their own autonomous spaces of distribution, and they haven't been able to yet. I mean, I don't know if you'll talk about it or not, but basically the truth is that they do not have the infrastructure to address the complexity of distribution. That's where I was saying that the ministry's initiative is quite good. And finally, going back to El Panal Commune, there's an initiative that's actually about 2 or 3 months old, but it's an important initiative that's called the Admirable Campaign, the Campaña Admirable. And basically, it actually is, in terms of its name, it's in recollection of Bolivar's 1813 campaign when he comes from kind of like liberating the territory from Colombia towards the capital, towards Caracas. This initiative is an initiative that breaks the barrier that capital builds between the campesinos and the city and the working class in the city. So basically, capitalism tends to divide everything up, chop it up all up, so that we cannot struggle together. And campesinos produce in the campo, and we purchase, and we, brothers and sisters in terms of class, purchase what they produce, but there's no direct relation between us because the bourgeoisie, or commonly called the intermediary, is in between. So there's this massive wall that's built between us as the working class. So basically, in this initiative, which is an initiative that's strategic for the commune, there's produce, fruit, and vegetables are being brought from communalized campesino organizations, and they are brought to Caracas. And they are sold at a much lower price. But the objective is not selling at a lower price. I mean, of course, people need to access food, and it's very overpriced. So you could say in the short term, you could say, yes, there's the objective of offering cheaper food that people can actually buy. But actually, really, the real objective is to break with the logic of the capitalist market, which exploits us, both campesinos and working class people in the city. So those would be kind of like interesting experiences that can like open a window towards something that has to grow a lot, towards exercises that have to become much more robust, and they will become more robust as communes and communards struggle. Struggle sometimes will have, that means that there will be contradictions with the state, and sometimes the state will collaborate. So we live in a society that is in transition, and this is, in any society in transition, this is going to happen. But fortunately, there are examples, even if they are small, that actually tell us that it is possible to build not only to produce without exploiters, but it is also possible to exchange without the bourgeoisie in between. So I guess that's all I would like to say. I mean, Chávez, of course, said, once you said it earlier on, Chávez said that, like the commune is a strategic project. In Golpe de Timón, in that very important speech that you were mentioning, he said, "Comuna o nada, commune or nothing." So yeah, I mean, I think that as we approach the July 28th elections, I think I always say to friends and comrades who are in the global north, well, support us. Of course, we are under a situation of blockade, but also, as you support the Bolivarian process, focus on the communes, because the communes is the space. Even if communes are small, they are the germ for the new society, and that's really extraordinary.
I'm always so grateful to be able to have these conversations with you, because I think for those of us who continue to look to that socialist horizon, it's precisely these questions, these contradictions, these tensions that happen between the grassroots and the state around this effort to be inventive, creative, to actually attend to the needs of population, to try to resolve the problems that are brought about by the crisis as a result of the sanctions. All of these things are the real kinds of difficult questions, contradictions, discussions that happen when we're talking about building socialism. And I think there's so many lessons there. You mentioned, that they're still kind of small and maybe isolated, but I think it's an extraordinary thing for us to be able to pay attention to and to learn from. Because I think like I said, for those of us who believe in socialism, there's so many lessons here that I think have a universal application. Thanks again so much for sharing your analysis and your experience with us, Cira. As always, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, José Luis. It's really been good to talk to you. And effectively, it is super important what is happening in communes. They are extraordinary.
Si no se siente, no se piensa, de verdad. Y si no se piensa, la nada es lo que nos espera.
In our next segment, we will speak with the Communard Union's communications coordinator, Juan Lenzo, about their efforts to produce under workers' control, the successes and challenges of the Communard Union, the organization's place in building dual power in Venezuela, and how their work could serve to reinvigorate the socialist project. Hello, welcome to the program. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the economic issues related to the communal project, the Communard Union. And to begin, we understand that to dismantle the bourgeois state is necessary to go through the economic sphere, to give special attention to that transformation. And the communal project that the Communard Union defends is based precisely on social property, on social ownership of the means of production, organizing the production, distribution, exchange, consumption, everything that is produced to satisfy social needs. And obviously with also a logic that transcends capitalist logic, market logic. So, when we're talking about all of the productive efforts, organizing, production, distribution, exchange, what are some of the strategies of the communes that are organized with the Communard Union to overcome that isolation that unfortunately we know exists, and really carry out the communal production beyond the margins and put it as part of the economy on a national scale?
Bueno, José Luis, muchas gracias por la invitación. Sin duda es un reto para el movimiento comunal abordar fundamentalmente el tema de...
José Luis, thank you very much for the invitation to participate. It is undoubtedly a challenge for the communal movement to fundamentally address the economic issue, with the understanding that we are in a complicated context, going through a years-long crisis due to the characteristics of the Venezuelan economic model, which many call a rent-based capitalism. It is a capitalism that is based on oil rents, which is the main source of income for the nation. This makes it so that Venezuelan capitalism has distinctive features that cannot be ignored. On the other hand, the novel proposal of the communes is an effort that is without precedent in the recent history of Venezuela. It is a bid to build, to create upon this economic context, and a bid to transform, to radically transform the model of society that today characterizes Venezuela. So, from the communal movement, we have promoted several discussions, debates, reflections on this subject. In principle, it is necessary to consider the close relationship that exists between the communal movement and the Venezuelan state. Because it was Chávez himself, from the constituent power, the state, who gave the impulse behind the communal movement, which was already developing in different ways, not explicitly as a communal movement or as a commune, but which was already searching for and testing organizational forms that allowed the Venezuelan people higher grades of political participation, fundamentally a higher grade of protagonism. So, in principle, that relationship is also a relationship that has elements of cooperation, of agreement, but also elements of tension and differences. In that relationship, Chávez always sought for the revolutionary subjects, the leadership that occupied space within the state, to push forward the communal project. From there, we have since secured spaces for the development of the territorialization of the project in different communes throughout the country, which in the midst of the economic crisis have inevitably had to resist the hardships, but which has nonetheless managed to build an independent path. We believe that we have to advance in simultaneous paths to try to develop a formula that will allow us to advance in the economic path and, on the other hand, transform the prevailing logic. We need to strengthen the social property companies and the economic initiatives within the commune. The communal economic system is integrated in principle by the communal social property companies, as well as the family production units, the solidarity exchange groups, the producers associations, and the multiple forms of the popular economy that are generated within the territories. Great effort to strengthen them must be made, to rebuild a good part of the economic tissue that was devoured in times of crisis. The support of the state is fundamental for that, to facilitate the transfer of resources, of knowledge, of the means of production, of land, of technical support that will allow the communal movement, the communal economic system, to move forward. On the other hand, as Chávez said in his speech, "Strike at the helm," it is necessary to overcome the vision of limited socialist projects that he referenced at the time. In particular, when it comes to the communal production units, it is necessary to overcome isolation. If we condemn the communal economic units to isolation, to fragmentation, they end up being devoured by capitalist maelstrom. What the president proposed was the need for a productive chain, which is one of the exits that we see and that we put in practice to try to strengthen each other. The commune must be seen as a totality, as a movement, and for this it is fundamental to integrate all activities, from production to consumption, which can guarantee a whole network, a whole communal framework around those activities. And another fundamental element raised by Chávez, this time in Allo Presidente Theoretical Number 1, he spoke about the need for communal aggregation. It is a very interesting concept, learned from historical experiences in which the communes must overcome their localist vision. Many times they end up consumed in themselves, wrapped up inside their own logic, in their local reality, and they are not able to look at the national and international panorama. Chávez exhorted the communal movement to transcend that local logic and integrate into a process of aggregation that goes from the local, passing through the regional, all the way to the national stage. This allows the movement to have the strength of a common program, a common cause, and which allows them to intervene in the national political life beyond that territory. That, of course, contrasts a lot with many of the proposals that have been made recently, which some government officials have been making, where they try to subordinate, bury the communal project in a kind of fourth-level democracy. Subordinated to the constituted national powers, the national government, the regional government, the municipal government, and ultimately, as a fourth level, the communal government. So instead of that, Chávez proposed the need to elevate the communal spirit, this project, to a national scale, drawing from local experiences. I believe that these three elements are fundamental to understand the ways, the mechanisms that the communal movement is pondering, that the communal movement is experimenting to break with the economic dynamic and try to build a force that allows for its transformation.
La dinámica económica e intentar construir una fuerza que permita su transformación.
I would like to go a little bit deeper here in that sense, to talk about the economic panorama as it exists today. Reinaldo Iturriza López, a columnist of Venezuelanalysis, former minister of communes, wrote at the time when the first Congress of the Communard Union was being held that given the economic conditions that existed at the time and due to the economic blockade, all the rest as we know, that the Congress was a first and early partial victory. And he argued that this allowed the rearticulation of dispersed forces. And today we are now more than 2 years removed from that first Congress, in the face of a different panorama, but also a different balance of forces. As you mentioned earlier, some voices are already raising a different vision, distinct from what the communes, the Communard Union, have defended, about what you believe the commune should be. Could you tell us a little bit more about the progress you have made since that Congress? And if you could engage in an evaluation, self-criticism exercise, in which areas is there more to be done? Where is there a need to strengthen the work, considering all these circumstances that we've just talked about? That is, the economic political panorama in Venezuela today.
Sí, mira, la génesis de la Unión Comunera no fue exactamente un proyecto teórico concebido con propósitos.
The genesis of the Communard Union was not exactly a theoretical project conceived and previously calculated with strategic ends. It came about as a result of the needs of the Venezuelan communal movement in the face of the crisis. Many of the communes were succumbing. They were disappearing in the face of the situation in Venezuela, and a group of communes began to connect with each other. They began to visit each other, to meet, to recognize each other as a subject of transformation, and little by little the spark of what we know today as the Communard Union was lit and eventually reaches a point of synthesis in the Foundational Congress of March 4, 2022. On this journey, the Communard Union discovered some methodologies. Though practice we discovered methodologies of work, We discovered forms of relations between the communes, discovered strengths and weaknesses, and discovered a way of doing politics, a way of regrouping the Chavista movement. So thinking about the successes that the Communard Union has achieved, I think there is a success around the remoralization of the people in the communes. That is the simple fact that comrades of other communes approached one or several communes. That simple approach generated a process of enthusiasm, of a feeling that you are not alone, that you are breaking in some way with the isolation that demoralized a good part of the comrades who had been promoting communal processes in their territories. So in principle, I believe that the Common Union has contributed before and after the Congress to a process of remoralization. We also have an organizational instrument of political agitation, of organization, of grassroots work that we have called the Argelia Laya Brigade. That brigade is composed of communards who go to a territory, and from there they accompany the organizational process, the educational process, the communication process of productive development. And that allows us to break the borders between communes, conceive ourselves as a single project, and also contribute with the remoralization, above all with the repoliticization of those territories, and advance in the construction of this national project. Therefore, this rearticulation of communal forces is also an achievement. With the Argelia Laya Brigade, we are not only strengthening and consolidating territories, but we are opening relationships, opening links with communes, with new communes that have been in requesting support, accompaniment, recognition from the Union. I think we have also managed to strengthen the communard identity. I think there is an important contribution from the Union around the fact that our people identify with its symbology, with its narrative, with the methods that the communal project has created. We have contributed in this process of re-encountering with Commander Chávez, with his legacy, with his programmatic proposals, with his spirit. Also, in that process of building identity, we consider it a success and an important achievement, the potential for incorporating youth into our communal processes. It is complicated to incorporate youth to revolutionary processes, and more so recently, especially when the revolutionary forces have been in power for many years. This tends to wear people out and tends to cause the revolutionary project to lose strength. The yonder generations did not live the more stellar moments, the moments of construction, of the development of consciousness, and they probably have fewer reasons to connect to a project such as the Bolivarian Revolution. Curiously, in the Communard Union, we have the advantage that we have been able to incorporate much more youth to our formative processes, communication processes, as well as to our productive processes, which are the fundamental areas in which the Communard Union Comunera works. I believe that we have also managed to weave relationships with similar movements internationally. We have achieved important connections with ALBA social movements, with the International People's Assembly. We have made connections with revolutionary movements in the United States, such as the Party for Socialism and Liberation, other organizations such as Code Pink, also based in the U.S., who have sent solidarity brigades to Venezuela to visit and learn about the work in the territories of the Communard Union, and they recognize the work that is being done. We are in a process of discussion of feminist politics. We have been advancing in the organization of the Communard women in the defense of their rights, leading the discussion of the foundations of what we call communal feminism. Some territorial meetings are being held there. We have planned to organize regional meetings and finally a great national congress to establish the foundations, the vision that we have regarding feminism, the vision that women have around communal feminism. I think we are falling short in other regards, as you said, engaging in self-criticism. We still need to reach greater degrees of organization. The Communard Union is a movement made up of around 66 communes, distributed in 5 regions of the country and encompassing several states in Venezuela. Without a doubt, it is a challenge to be in sync among this heterogeneity that emerges in a reality like this. However, we consider that much more effort is needed and even methodological revision to achieve greater levels of connection between the different territories, between the different instances and work commissions of the Communard Union Comunera, and developing spaces to meet. We have had many difficulties, fundamentally due to logistical problems. We have issues getting fuel, and sometimes the territories are very distant from each other, and it is difficult for us to meet each other. However, there is always a constant revision. This is the point of self-criticism. I think another important element is that we consider it necessary to reach greater degrees of autonomy. This has a lot to do with economic limitations that many communal territories are facing. The crisis hit many of the communes, which are now in a process of reconfiguration, of reconstruction. And to succeed, they need resources from the state, which is the source of resources for the communal movement. By law, in fact. We have a system of laws addressing popular power, which gives the communal project a series of guarantees and benefits from the state. However, many of those benefits, many of those resources end up negatively affecting these exercises of autonomy. Many times our priorities end up being abandoned, and the communal movement ends up many times attending more institutional priorities. There are concessions in terms of autonomy being made, and it has to do a lot with other elements, other weaknesses that we have as the Communard Union, which brings us to the challenge of having an economic network of our own. Although we have in various territories very important economic and productive initiatives, we have not yet managed to consolidate a network that articulates our productive experiences and that confronts the critical nodes of the productive process. We have identified several critical nodes, from the obtaining of seeds and fertilizers, going through everything that has to do with the transformation process, but an important critical node has to do with commercialization. I think this is an important critical node that we have not been able to solve. Venezuelan intermediaries, private intermediaries, continue in some way to occupy that space, and they continue to weaken the possibility of building that communal economic fabric. I think that we need to concentrate our efforts to be able to attend to this critical node that affects the development of the communal economic fabric.
Este nudo crítico que afecta al mecanismo, a los mecanismos, al tejido económico comunal.
In your answer, you were talking about the work of the brigade. It makes me think about something that I've noticed from the work of the Communard Union. That is, this emphasis, this attention that you give to a larger, wider territorial reach. That attention that you give to the need to have control over the territory and the means of production. But you also spoke to me about autonomy, that sometimes there is this tendency to respond to institutional agendas. So it seems to me that we can understand that there is a contradiction or dialectic, that relationship between control over the territory or the means of production and the capacity or the challenge of building an autonomous political power, a dual power, that is sometimes called. Can you tell us a little bit more about that understanding within the Communard Union, which speaks of the need to have control over the territory and the means of production in order to have that autonomous political power?
Ese concepto del poder dual lo comprendimos con Chávez, pero lo aprendimos de la experiencia histórica, ¿no? Es un concepto que...
The concept of dual power, we understood it with Chávez, but we learned from the historical experience. It is a concept that the Bolsheviks developed very well. Trotsky and Lenin talked about it, even using it to describe the role of the bourgeoisie during the French Revolution. Chávez, from the early years of government, being a good subversive, he called himself a subversive living inside the Miraflores Palace, who felt he had the responsibility of disassembling the bourgeois state from within, knew that transformation was not possible if it was only done from within. He knew it required support and an organization that arose from the outside, parallel to the state. In fact, the social missions were initially an effort to build a parallel apparatus because of the fact that the state was not able to address social contradictions, nor attend to the demands of the Venezuelan people. So Chávez made several efforts on this issue of building dual power necessary for a radical transformation of society. So we understood this with Chávez, we learned from historical experience about the concept, and we gave it continuity. We reaffirmed it through the Communard Union. We believe that the communal movement cannot be an appendix of the institutional power, of the constituted power, of any party organization. It cannot be subordinated, it cannot become a fourth-level democracy, as some have attempted to do in the present day. The communal organization is not a continuation of the old neighborhood-level organization that existed in Venezuela in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where small neighborhood matters were only addressed, and the exercise was limited only to participation without protagonism. We consider that the bid to build the commune for communal power is an effort that includes a willingness to wield power, power to transform. Communards need power. To this end, we in the Union propose that we must build examples of power, but we must also contest power, and that we must also take spaces where power is exercised. And this dispute, this construction, this takeover of spaces occurs in the communal territories. As the project is scaled up, as our willingness to take power grows, this contest over power grows. We have experiences in the territories that range from taking over and recovering the means of production, recovering abandoned land, all the through to control of institutions. For example, recently in several communes, the leadership of public schools has been taken over due to the fact that as a consequence of the crisis they have suffered greatly, so the commune has taken over the management of such schools. There is even a contest over the curriculum offered in those spaces, which are spaces of power too. We have the experience of Simon Planus, where there was a contest over control of municipal power, the mayoralty in this case. In other territories, legislative political spaces have been contested. That is, in tactical terms, we have identified the need to occupy spaces of power, but subordinated to the communal project, because the self-criticism is also valid. In other moments, exactly the opposite has happened. Some members of the communal movement, leaders or a spokesperson, take power and they end up abandoning the base that brought them there. This is typical of the bourgeois liberal democracy. The disconnection occurs and ultimately the leader who took that power ends up concerned with the race to secure individual political assent. So, in that exercise of construction, of contestation, of taking power, there are, of course, contradictions. Contradictions with constituted power, there are contradictions with political forces that are active in that territory, and there is a struggle for the control of those spaces. In some cases, there is also cooperation, relations between organizations with institutions. There are many institutions that the communal movement has developed projects of great scope. There is a fluid relationship, but there are others where this does not occur, as I mentioned previously. The relations with the state are of tension and cooperation. They are not homogeneous relations, as the government is not homogeneous either. There is a quite peculiar dynamic, and this happens precisely because the communal movement has its own agenda, defends it, and defends the fundamental principles and the fulfillment of the program of struggle that was made for this end. I think that is part of some of the most sensitive and recurrent problems that we can identify when faced with the challenge of the process of building power, of contests over power within the communal territories.
A la hora de generar esos procesos de construcción de poder, de disputa dentro de los territorios.
Yeah, of course. And I think in your particular case, a bit what I was pointing out to in the question, I think it's partly due to the fact that you have certain autonomy, that thanks to that control of the territory, this ideological expansion of the ideas that are the basis of the project, it's not so easy for some elements within the constituted power to marginalize you. That is, it's not possible for them to try to cut you off in the same way.
Claro, sí, es que muchas veces nos enfrentamos a intereses.
Of course, yes. Many times we face interests contrary to the interests of the commune, economic interests, political interests. The commune is betting on a radical transformation in political terms, in economic terms, in social terms, and that, of course, affects the interests of individuals, of political tendencies, of groups, of organizations that see their positions, their privileges threatened in the face of the advance of the commune. So I think it is part of the struggle. However, I think that precisely this concept, this category of dual power, gives us a work plan that gives the commune its own identity, and that also protects it from any potential for co-optation, which is another of the great dangers of the Venezuelan communal movement, the danger of co-optation, the danger that it ends up being assimilated by leaders, by tendencies, by forces that end up emptying it of its content, that end up disfiguring it, that end up using the communal project as a tool to secure their own interests and aspirations.
Yes, of course. So this would be my last question. And well, in many ways, I try to summarize a little bit of what we've been talking throughout this interview. That precisely at the beginning, you told us that this project was born, above all, as an answer to the crisis. And I know that you collaborated in the writing of that document, which seems to be very well written. I quote it on many occasions when I do grassroots work, this document, the programmatic basis and statutes of the Communard Union. And it speaks to that, of the need to put forward a revolutionary response in the face of a crisis. But following the development of national policy in Venezuela, a lot is said about the crisis. And I don't want to deny that it exists, of course, or underestimate its impact. But I think sometimes it can distract us from what the end goal is. And I was reading an article where you yourself have commented that the horizon is still socialism. And I agree with that. But I think that, as we've been talking about, the balance of forces right now, at this moment, have resulted in policies that favor the owners of capital. And obviously it is the interests of the owners of capital, the bourgeoisie, that don't favor the expansion of popular power. So my question is, what position should the popular power organizations, these dual power organizations that are being built, take to reverse that situation? To begin to accumulate more political power in the name of the working class and the campesino, to dispute the direction the Bolivarian project has at the moment, given the circumstances in Venezuela today.
Mira, nosotros, tal como tú lo comentas, partimos del reconocimiento del efecto negativo de las sanciones y el poder devastador del bloqueo. Innegable y todo análisis parte del reconocimiento de ello.
As you said, we start from a recognition of the negative effect of sanctions and the devastating power of blockade. It is undeniable, and all analysis must begin with a recognition of this, because it has had a brutal impact on the political, social, and economic life of Venezuela. However, we also disagree with giving the blockade sanctions a supreme or superior quality, as if it were a universal explanation to all the challenges we face in Venezuela. I think it would be a great mistake to simplify the crisis that we are currently going through only to the impact of the blockade. Evidently, in the face of that aggression that we suffer, there are multiple possibilities, multiple ways of responding. Another thing that we disagree with is this idea that some have tried to impose that there was no option than to face the aggression, the blockade, the sanctions, the crisis, aside from opening the economy, to the opening up of even political spaces, to the private sectors of the economy. Evidently, this is an opening that has allowed a repositioning of the Venezuelan business class, not only in the economic realm, but even in the ideological realm. That is to say, there is an operation to wash the face of the bourgeoisie, to free it from the responsibility of the crisis, to free it from the responsibility they have in the economic war, and reposition it as a valid option, as a subject, as a class that is now collaborating, that is now contributing, and that is now an ally. We denounce that opening, that policy of alliances with private capital that is evident when one analyzes the macroeconomic reality of Venezuela. The communal movement is still a small force, of course, with very little economic capacity, which is still in the process of organization, which is still in the process of training, which is also learning to self-govern as a people. I think that is one of the great achievements of the communal project, that is, to think of it as a great school for self-government, but also a school for the management and administration of the means of production, a school for mobilization, for the construction of a social conscience. However, the balance of forces right now, as you said, is contrary to the idea of socialism. However, we insist, we consider that it is one of the non-negotiable foundations of the Bolivarian project. We understand that for tactical reasons there is a need to make adjustments, to make some concessions, but there is a series of constitutive principles of the Bolivarian Revolution project that are simply not negotiable. We insist on the socialist project, but not a disfigured socialism, not a denaturalized, whitened socialism. We insist on the socialism of the social ownership of the means of production. We insist on the socialism of popular power, of the need to supplant the bourgeois state for a new form of state. We insist on a socialism that defends our sovereignty over natural resources. We insist on a socialism that opens the doors to a participatory and protagonist democracy. We insist on socialism that advances a set of fundamental rights of the people, that improves the well-being of the population. We aim for that form of socialism. Of course, we understand that although the balance of forces is not favorable today in the face of this turn toward private capital, which the Bolivarian process has become closer with, we insist that part of our work with the grassroots is to demonstrate that in our territories a socialist experience can be prefigured. It is part of our challenge, but that it is not enough, and therefore an articulation of our strengths is necessary, a unity so we can turn this into a real option for the rest of the Venezuelan people who are not organized in communes. In the Communard Union, we propose mechanisms of articulation with other revolutionary subjects to think about the country, to propose a way out, to contribute with solutions, not only of the current crisis, but of the structural crisis that we have been living in Venezuela since the late 70s, when a crisis of capitalist accumulation was evident, and where an exhaustion of the Venezuelan state was also recognized. So we will continue on the path of Chávez, learning and incorporating that great legacy that he left us. insisting on the communal path towards socialism as the only way to honor the demands of the people, as the only way to achieve a true transformation of Venezuelan society.
Como única forma de honrar las demandas del pueblo, como única forma de lograr una verdadera transformación de la sociedad venezolana.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I just want to say that it seems to me that no matter how small, we could say that this effort is, yes, I definitely agree with you that it is an example for Venezuela. But I would even go further. As someone who observes the dynamics and politics of the country from abroad, it's an example for all of Latin America, perhaps for the whole world. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you very much for your time and for your answers.
Muchas gracias, José Luis.
That's our program for today. For more on the issues explored, check out episode 19, A War Without Bombs and Communal Resistance, episode 17, Life is Better in the Commune, and episode 2, Popular Power Under Duress. You can also check out our recent video on the Communard Union. Be sure to visit us at Venezuelanalysis.com for regular news and analysis on all things Venezuela. We're also everywhere on social media. If you enjoyed the program, please share it with your friends. We'll end today's episode with the song Comuna o Nada by Dionis Bahamonde, Alan González, Eli Rendón, and Truc.
Les encomiendo aquí con especial atención de los territorios comunales, el tema de las comunas.
Que florece en nuestro suelo, es el sol que ilumina desde el cielo. En común hay alegría, para el chamo y para el abuelo. Justicia para mi gente y justicia para mi pueblo.
Poner el alma de verdad para crear esas comunas, el cuerpo y el alma, y darle poder al pueblo en las comunas.
Acción, común es la calle, común es canción, conciencia social que despertó mi nación para asegurar que siga nuestra revolución. Comuna,